I never believed in ghosts or the paranormal. That is until that fateful night when I had the scariest experience of my life on a lonely stretch of highway. It was a typical Friday evening, and I was driving home after a long day at work. The clock had just struck midnight as I merged onto the deserted highway, surrounded by nothing but darkness and the occasional flicker of passing streetlights. As I drove, I couldn't shake off the feeling of unease that had settled over me. Maybe it was the eerie silence, broken only by the hum of my engine and the occasional rustle of wind through the trees. Or perhaps it was the way the shadows seemed to dance and twist along the roadside, playing tricks on my tired mind. I tried to brush off my unease, turning up the radio and focusing on the road ahead. But no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching me, lurking just beyond the edge of my vision. Suddenly, out of nowhere, a thick fog rolled in, engulfing the highway in a blanket of white. I slowed down, squinting through the windshield as I strained to see the road ahead. The fog was so dense that I could barely make out the faint glow of my headlights reflecting off the pavement. Heart pounding, I gripped the steering wheel tighter, my knuckles turning white with fear. It felt like I was driving blind, relying solely on instinct to guide me through the thick mist. And then, just when I thought things couldn't get any worse, I saw it, a figure standing on the side of the road, illuminated by the faint glow of my headlights. My breath caught in my throat as I squinted through the fog, trying to get a better look. It was a woman, her long hair blowing in the wind as she stood perfectly still, staring straight ahead with vacant eyes. My stomach churned with dread as I realized she was wearing a tattered wedding gown, her pale skin almost translucent in the dim light. I slammed on the brakes, bringing my car to a screeching halt as I stared in horror at the apparition before me. What was she doing out here, all alone in the middle of nowhere? And why did she look so lifeless? Trembling, I reached for my phone, intending to call for help. But as my fingers brushed against the screen, the figure suddenly turned and began to glide towards me, her movements smooth and fluid, almost otherworldly. Panic surged through me as I fumbled with my phone, dropping it onto the passenger seat as I scrambled to start the car again. But no matter how hard I tried, the engine refused to turn over, leaving me stranded in the darkness with the ghostly apparition drawing closer with each passing second. Desperate, I locked the doors and huddled in my seat, praying for the nightmare to end. But just as the ghost reached the driver's side window, she vanished into thin air, leaving nothing behind but the echoing sound of her unearthly laughter. Terrified, I sat frozen in my seat, unable to move as I waited for the fog to lift and the world to return to normal. It felt like an eternity before the mist finally began to dissipate, revealing the empty highway stretching out before me. With shaking hands, I started the car and peeled out onto the road, putting as much distance between myself and the haunted stretch of highway as possible. And as I drove, I couldn't shake the feeling that I had just narrowly escaped something truly sinister, something that defied all rational explanation. From that day on, I never looked at the world in quite the same way. Because sometimes, when the night is dark and the fog rolls in, I can still hear her laughter echoing in the darkness, a chilling reminder of the night I came face to face with the supernatural. It was a Saturday night, and the air was thick with the remnants of the party that had just ended. Laughter and music still echoed in my ears as I stumbled out of the house, feeling the cool night air wash over me. The time had come to bid farewell to the festivities and make my way home, alone in the darkness of the night. As I settled into the driver's seat and started the engine, a sense of weariness washed over me. The alcohol from the party still lingered in my system, clouding my senses and making the world around me seem hazy and indistinct. But despite my fatigue, I knew I had to make the journey home, navigating the deserted roads that stretched out before me. As I drove, the silence of the night enveloped me, broken only by the soft hum of the engine and the occasional rustle of leaves in the wind. The darkness seemed to press in from all sides, creating an eerie atmosphere that sent shivers down my spine. But I brushed off my unease, telling myself it was just the late hour playing tricks on my mind. But then, without warning, disaster struck. The engine sputtered and died, leaving me stranded on the deserted road with nothing but the darkness for company. Panic surged through me as I tried to restart the car, but it was no use. The engine refused to turn over, leaving me stranded in the darkness of the night. Heart pounding, I reached for my phone, intending to call for help. But as I dialed the number, a feeling of dread settled over me. There was no signal, no way to reach out to the outside world for assistance. I was truly alone, stranded on the deserted road with no hope of escape. As I sat there in the darkness, a sense of unease began to gnaw at the pit of my stomach. It was as if something was watching me from the shadows, unseen but unmistakably present. I glanced nervously out the window, half expecting to see some sinister figure lurking in the darkness, but there was nothing there, just the empty road stretching out before me. With a sinking feeling in the pit of my stomach, I realized that I would have to venture out into the darkness and try to find help on foot. It was a risky move, but I knew I had no other choice if I wanted to make it home safely. Gathering my courage, I opened the car door and stepped out into the cool night air. The darkness seemed to press in around me, suffocating and oppressive, as I made my way cautiously down the deserted road. But then, just as I reached the edge of the road, I heard it, the sound of footsteps echoing in the darkness behind me. Panic surged through me as I turned to see who, or what, was following me, but there was no one there, just the empty road stretching out into the darkness. Heart pounding, I quickened my pace, desperate to put as much distance between myself and whatever unseen menace lurked in the shadows. But then, without warning, I felt a sharp pain in my side, followed by a warm trickle of blood running down my shirt. I stumbled and fell to the ground, gasping for breath as the darkness closed in around me. And as I lay there, bleeding and helpless, I realized with a sinking feeling that I was not alone on that deserted road. Something, or someone, was out there in the darkness, waiting to claim its next victim. And as the darkness consumed me, I knew that my fate had been sealed from the moment my car had broken down on that fateful night drive. It was a crisp fall evening, and my friends and I were on our way back from a weekend camping trip in the mountains. The sun had already set, and darkness had enveloped the winding country roads we were navigating. Little did we know, this drive would turn into one of the scariest experiences of our lives. As we cruised down the deserted road, the only sounds were the hum of the engine and the occasional rustle of leaves in the wind. My friend, Max, was behind the wheel, while Emma and I lounged in the back seat, reminiscing about the adventures we had just experienced in the wilderness. Suddenly, without warning, the headlights flickered and died, plunging us into total darkness. Panic surged through me as Max cursed and struggled to maintain control of the car. For a moment, it felt like we were hurtling through space, lost in a void of blackness. But just as quickly as they had gone out, the headlights flickered back to life, casting a weak beam of light on the road ahead. Heart racing, I glanced out the window, trying to make sense of what had just happened. Had it been a simple electrical glitch, or was there something more sinister at play? Before any of us could voice our concerns, Emma let out a blood-curdling scream, causing Max to slam on the brakes. My heart leaped into my throat as I turned to see what had terrified her. There, Standing in the middle of the road was a figure dressed in tattered clothes, its face obscured by shadows. It was so unexpected and so eerie that for a moment, I couldn't even process what I was seeing. "Who the hell is that?" Max muttered, his voice trembling with fear. But before any of us could answer, the figure began to move, lurching towards the car with an unnatural gait. My blood turned to ice as I realized this wasn't just some lost hiker or stranded motorist. No, there was something off about this person, something distinctly inhuman. Without hesitation, Max slammed the car into reverse, tires squealing as he floored the gas pedal and sent us hurtling backward down the road. My heart pounded in my chest as I watched the figure recede into the darkness, its twisted form disappearing from sight. For what felt like an eternity, we drove in silence, each of us grappling with the terror of what we had just witnessed. It wasn't until we reached the nearest town that we dared to speak of it, huddled together in a roadside diner as we tried to make sense of the inexplicable. Was it a ghost? A demon? Or perhaps something even more sinister lurking in the darkness? We may never know for sure, but one thing was certain. We would never forget the night we encountered the unknown on a lonely stretch of road. As we finally made our way back home, the memory of that terrifying encounter lingered like a shadow, haunting our every thought and filling us with a newfound respect for the mysteries that lurk in the darkness. And though we may never fully understand what we saw that night, one thing was certain: we would never look at a night drive the same way again. It was a Friday night, and I found myself driving home alone after a long day at work. The clock had just struck midnight, and the streets were eerily quiet as I navigated the familiar roads. The only company I had was the soft hum of the engine and the occasional flicker of streetlights passing by. As I drove, a sense of unease settled over me. It wasn't unusual for me to be out late, but something about the darkness seemed to heighten my senses, making me acutely aware of my surroundings. I tried to shake off the feeling, telling myself it was just fatigue playing tricks on my mind. But then, as I approached a particularly desolate stretch of road, I saw something that made my blood run cold: a figure standing by the side of the road, illuminated by the glow of the streetlights. My heart skipped a beat as I slowed down, my instincts telling me that something was not right. The figure was motionless, its features obscured by the darkness, but I could feel its eyes on me as I passed by. I tried to convince myself that it was just a trick of the light, but the image stayed with me, haunting my thoughts as I continued on my journey. As I drove on, the feeling of unease only grew stronger, like a weight pressing down on my chest. It was as if the darkness itself was closing in around me, suffocating and oppressive. And then, just when I thought things couldn't get any worse, disaster struck. Without warning, the headlights flickered and died, leaving me stranded in the darkness. Panic surged through me as I frantically tried to restart the car, but it was no use. The engine remained silent, refusing to cooperate. I felt a surge of adrenaline as I realized the gravity of my situation. I was alone, stranded in the middle of nowhere, with no way to call for help. As I sat in the darkness, my mind raced with 1,000 terrifying possibilities. What if someone, or something, was out there, lurking in the shadows, waiting to strike? I tried to shake off the feeling of dread, telling myself it was just my imagination running wild. But then, I heard it, the sound of footsteps approaching from somewhere outside the car. My heart pounded in my chest as I strained to listen, the sound growing louder and more ominous with each passing second. And then, just as suddenly as it had started, the footsteps ceased, leaving behind an eerie silence that seemed to echo through the car. I sat there in the darkness, paralyzed with fear, unsure of what to do next. Every instinct told me to stay put, to wait for help to arrive. But as the minutes ticked by, the feeling of unease only grew stronger, like a knot in the pit of my stomach. With trembling hands, I reached for my phone, hoping against hope that I would find a signal. But as I dialed the emergency number, I was met with nothing but silence. I felt a cold sweat break out on my forehead as I realized the gravity of my situation. I was truly alone, with no one to help me but myself. Summoning every ounce of courage I had, I opened the car door and stepped out into the darkness. The night air was cold and still, the only sound the pounding of my heart in my ears. I took a hesitant step forward, my senses on high alert as I scanned the darkness for any sign of movement. But there was nothing there, just the empty road stretching out before me. And then, just when I thought things couldn't get any worse, I heard it, the sound of breathing, low and raspy, coming from somewhere in the darkness. My blood ran cold as I realized I was not alone. Someone, or something, was out there, watching me, waiting to strike. With a sense of growing dread, I turned and ran, my footsteps echoing in the darkness as I fled from whatever lurked in the shadows. And as I ran, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being pursued, that the darkness itself was alive with some malevolent force bent on my destruction. But I refused to give in to fear. With every step, I pushed myself harder, driven by the primal instinct to survive. And as the first light of dawn broke over the horizon, I finally saw the outline of civilization in the distance, a beacon of hope in the darkness. I ran harder, fueled by the promise of safety, until finally, I reached the safety of town, my heart pounding in my chest as I collapsed to the ground, exhausted but alive. And as I lay there, gasping for breath, I couldn't help but wonder what had happened to me out there in the darkness. And would I ever be able to forget the horrors I had encountered on that fateful night drive? It was a chilly autumn night, and I was driving home after spending the evening with friends. The clock on the dashboard read 1:30 a.m. As I navigated the winding roads that cut through the countryside. The night was unusually dark, with only the faint glow of the moon to illuminate the way. As I rounded a bend, my headlights caught something moving in the distance, a dark shape darting across the road ahead. My foot instinctively eased off the gas pedal as I squinted, trying to make out what it was. At first, I thought it might be a deer or some other animal common to the area. But as the creature drew nearer, I realized it was like nothing I had ever seen before. It moved with an uncanny grace, its long limbs stretching and contracting in fluid, almost unnatural movements. Its body was sleek and slender, with a dark fur-like coat that seemed to absorb the light from my headlights. As it crossed the road, I caught a glimpse of its face, a grotesque combination of features that sent a shiver down my spine. Its eyes glowed with an otherworldly light, and its mouth was twisted into a silent snarl that seemed to promise unspeakable horrors. I slammed on the brakes, bringing the car to a screeching halt just inches from where the creature had disappeared into the darkness. My heart pounded in my chest as I sat there, trying to process what I had just seen. Part of me wanted to get out of the car and investigate, to confirm that I hadn't imagined the whole thing. But another part of me, the part that screamed survival, urged me to stay put, to lock the doors and get as far away from that place as possible. In the end, instinct won out, and I quickly hit the gas, speeding away from the spot where the creature had vanished into the night. But even as I drove, I couldn't shake the feeling of unease that lingered in the air. For weeks afterward, I couldn't stop thinking about that strange encounter on the dark road. Was it just a trick of the light, or had I truly come face to face with something beyond the realm of human understanding? I tried to put it out of my mind, to chalk it up to fatigue or an overactive imagination. But no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't shake the feeling that I had witnessed something truly inexplicable that night, a creature from the depths of the unknown, crossing paths with me in the darkness.